Hello everyone and welcome back to another book review. Today I am going to be reviewing Forbidden Rites, a Necromancer's Manual of the 15th Century, and this is by Richard Kieckhefer. So this was actually a recommendation from a viewer, and I will put the viewer in the comments down below, who left a comment on one of my books and suggested that I read this book because it was very transformative for them when they were in their undergraduate career, and it ultimately led them to specialize in studying magic. That's my understanding from the viewer's comment. And I've been kind of on a kick of medieval manuscripts and medieval thought and medieval art and the way that culture and thought was processed in the Middle Ages, but I have no specialized training in history, especially not the medieval history, so this is all just from my reading. So I gave this book a read, and I wanted to talk about what you can expect and what was in this book, as well as some of my thoughts and takeaways from this book as well. And I always love suggestions, and I love comments, so please put your comments, commentary, and suggestions in the comment section down below. Forbidden Rites by Richard Kieckhefer. So this book is a focus on a very specific medieval manuscript that was located or is located in the Bavarian State Library. So I find that of the medieval books I read that focus on manuscripts, you can either go broad and talk about a topic, and these tend to be the ones that maybe view a little or skew a little less academic. So these maybe are books like the astrology in medieval manuscripts or magic in medieval manuscripts books that I'm reading, still high quality books, but that don't look at one particular manuscript, instead look at a wide range of manuscripts and try to pull maybe specific concepts or topics out to discuss and talk about how astrology was viewed overall in the medieval society, or how magic was viewed overall, or how certain art things were viewed in medieval times. So those are kind of broad ones. And a book like this instead goes for the narrow view. They're looking at one manuscript and they're seeing what we can learn from this one manuscript. Another book review that I did that I will link at the end, called Medieval Bestiaries, focused on one bestiary and tried to pull all the concepts and things that we can extract from the manuscript from one manuscript. So this was in that narrow focus category. We are just focusing on one manuscript that is currently in the Bavarian State Library. And this manuscript was a collection that was put together as a manual for use of the magicians in the late Middle Ages. The original owner and the reason for compilation is not entirely known, and a little bit about the history is discussed at the beginning, but the focus isn't about magic, necromancy, conjuration, exorcisms, or anything on a broad medieval societal scale, but instead focused to what was contained in this manuscript. The book is divided into the first half, which is commentary from the author, and the second half, which is the text in Latin. So I do not read Latin, I do not speak Latin, so the second half of the book I did not read because I couldn't read it. So for me, this was really only a 190 or so page book, so the second half was not read by me, but if you can read or understand Latin, as I assume the target audience for this book would, you can enjoy the second half of the book as well and have the primary manuscript available for your reading. I just had to trust that Kieckhefer was interpreting the text correctly, and I could not read the Latin to make my own conclusions, but that is because this book I think is targeting a more academic audience. The manuscript contains quite a bit of information, and it talks about experiments, rituals, and prayers for magical use. It's more of a technical manual, so if you want to have this illusion, you follow these steps. Particularly, there is an interest in which spirits you need to call forward, where you need to place items on a magical circle, and things of that nature. So it's more like a guide for if you want to have this effect, these are things that you need to be doing. So that is the purpose of this. There's different prayers, rituals, experiments that you can perform for whatever you would like. A lot of this revolves though around power, either power over a person or the ability to have something be known, the power of knowledge, and that is of course a very human trait. The desire for power is universal, and you can see it as well in this manuscript as anything else. Power is really what people are after. The table of contents really provides a really good overview because the author divides the experiments in this book into different broad categories, and then he addresses them as these categories. So the introduction is just magical books and magical rites, and chapter 2 just reviews the Munich Handbook of Necromancy, which is the one that's being discussed here. It's CLM 849, and that's where we go into why this may have been compiled and how we know about this and where it currently is. So those are the first two chapters. But then When we look at the experiments in this book, they can be divided into different types, and those types he discusses in detail. He does have this chart on page 27 and 28, which show all the different sections of this book and the categorization he puts them in. They are either psychological, illusionary, or for divination, although there are other minor sections included as well. And he starts with doing the illusion experiments. These are the ones that I found to be the most harmless, in the sense that this was more, it felt like these experiments were more for fun, some fun, making a castle in the woods for the king to find. It was more the fun aspect of it. But the other two were more practical or practically focused and could have very, very dark sides to them. So chapter 3 is the illusionary experiments. Chapter 4 is the psychological experiments. And this is where I really think the power comes in, and we're going to talk about that in my thoughts overall. The love of power that all humans seem to have, and these psychological experimentations, rituals, prayers, which were designed to gain a level of power or psychological control over someone else. The third category is divination experiments, and a lot of this was designed to figure out who stole something, who was a thief, or what happened. And this is a class of magic that I've seen in other books that I have read, particularly around using animals or rituals to find stolen money. Money obviously is something that people want to find when it's been stolen. So there's a lot of experimentation about trying to find this stolen money. There's a lot of use about how to use bowls of water, or particularly boys' fingernails, which was something I never heard of before, or maybe perhaps a crystal ball to view the perpetrator or what happened and lead to an arrest. So that whole section was about finding a source of truth and being able to find who stole your money, basically. The Chapter 6, this was under formulas for commanding spirits, conjurations, and exorcisms. So this is where there are blurry lines, and blurry lines are kind of everywhere in this book, because the book is designed, it seems, for someone who is familiar with Christianity. It's kind of for the clerical class, in the sense that these are prayers utilizing things that are very common in Christian theology, and yet it kind of is going a little bit further than perhaps Christian theology would like these to go. And exorcisms, that's something that is in the church in Christian theology, although I think maybe it has a little bit of a tenuous position in Christian theology. I'm not an expert on exactly how it's necessarily viewed by institutions like the Catholic Church, but conjuration might fall more on the side that people would look disapprovingly on, especially in the Middle Ages. So you have exorcism, which is something that might be seen as a more appropriate form of interacting with spirits, as well as conjuration. And there was also an emphasis on the spirits being conjured. Some of them seemed to be, or were, archangels that were named, but others were clearly demons. So what kind of spirits were being conjured also kind of muddied the waters on, was this an acceptable practice in the church? I think this book would be a fascinating book to discuss with the right group. So it is a slower read, as you might be able to tell. It is academic, and it took me a long time to get through this book. I couldn't read through the pages very quickly, which isn't a bad thing, because I had to take a lot of time to process what I was reading. And I think in a book like this, it would be fantastic to read with a small group, because I feel like we could bounce ideas off each other and really try to better understand what we are reading in the book. But I did the best I could reading it by myself, and I do think it was a very interesting book, and I think the author does a fantastic job pointing out a lot of stuff. So the first thing I want to point out is actually on page 11, and I have a sticky note where he calls out something that I think is kind of an important form of nuance, which sometimes isn't in books that I read. And that is, nor can we understand the virulence of the critics' assault on magic without knowing the purpose magic was believed to serve. The glorification of the transgressive and the vilification of persecutors has perhaps too often blinded us to the recognition that much magic was intended for sexual coercion and exploitation, or for unscrupulous careerism, or for vigilante action against thieves that could easily lead to false accusations. I do not propose to moralize about these activities, but as a corrective to naive romanticizing, I do want to make clear the kind of magic one can expect to find in late medieval sources. So I think that, and this is true, there have been many, particularly women throughout history, who have been falsely accused of being witches, using witchcraft, communing with spirits or the devil, and therefore been killed for this. And many of these are completely false accusations. But I think that when we paint with broad strokes that everyone who persecutes, everyone who is going after these magicians are evil, and I don't think you should be burning people at the stake, but also that everyone who did this magic was somehow, and he says it was the like approval or the romanticization of the transgressive, the glorification of the transgressive. These people are going against the established church, so then they are therefore the heroes of the story. And I want to make clear that there are many cases in which the Catholic Church had inquisitions, there were witch hunting. Some of those were outside the Catholic Church. They're just people. And there's plenty of stories where that is true. But when we paint with these broad strokes, as he says, we lose the point that whether or not you believe this magic was in any way effective, these people wanted power who were using these magical spells. These people wanted to, in some of these cases, control people, particularly, as they mentioned, for sexual coercion or the false accusation. If you claim to have used the spirit to find someone who's the thief of your money who didn't do it, then you could be killing someone who isn't really guilty, which is the same thing that was happening to the witches who were being accused during the witch trial. So I think he makes a very good point of nuance that could spawn a whole conversation about how this idea that, they either weren't doing anything or this was a totally fine, accepted part of society, or it should have been. It's the purpose behind some of these magical rites was not just innocent fun, was not just, they were not all the illusionary, let's build a castle, let's have some fun experience. These people really wanted power, and in the psychological part of the book, you really see these people wanted to control particularly women, but all sorts of people for their own personal benefit and gain. So the people using these books were also using them to their own end and for their own gain, and not always for the right reasons. And the efficacy of what they were doing, I will leave up to you, but I feel like that was a very important distinction that I'm glad he made at the beginning. The next was a connection to astrology that I found throughout this book. So I just read a book called Astrology in Medieval Manuscripts by, I believe, Sophie Page, and it talked about the role astrology played in the medieval mind and medieval thought, and of course, medieval manuscripts. So in medieval times, astrology was connected with astronomy. These two were together. You would use the astronomical side to measure the positions of the planets and the astrological side of your science to say what that says for you. But there is a push and pull between the kind of astrology that was accepted by the church and the kind of astrology that was not accepted by the church. And both of these were considered sound science in a way that they're not today, where astrology is separated out as its own thing, but astronomy is a science that is still studied and people can go on to get PhDs. So I think that there was a push and pull between astrology and the Catholic Church, the reigning religious institution at the time, on what kind of astrology was acceptable versus what was not. And that caused plenty of problems. So there is a section on page 177 where we see someone took astrology too far. It says here, and again, I'm starting kind of in the middle of the action. Suffice it to point out that this Bolingbroke clearly was an astronomer or astrologer and surely had cast the horoscope of Henry VI, already an activity that smacked of treason. So already using astrology to cast a horoscope of a reigning figure was seen as going too far. But if casting a horoscope of an average person, at least according to the other book I read, there were texts of this. So whether or not that was going to be persecuted for treason or bring about the death penalty if you just cast it for a peasant, I feel like there was some difference in where the church, and you can see that also in this book, the church was kind of letting some stuff slide in a sense, but there was a line you couldn't cross. And so sometimes astrology was on the right side of the law, and by the law I mean the Catholic Church, and in other occasions, astrology was not. And astrology comes in again and again in this book, including what times, what signs, when the sun is in this house, when the moon is in this house, whatever. That's when you need to be doing this experiment. So we can see the interplay with astrology in this book. I really liked the tapestry imagery that was used, where you kind of have this acceptable version on the front, and on the back end of the tapestry with all the knots is kind of the the way that things were practiced in society. So this tapestry imagery was really interesting throughout, and I really liked the treatment on talking about the different spirits that were called, how some of them fell into the side that maybe would be viewed as good, the archangels. There were also spirits that seemed to be kind of neutral, and there were spirits that were being called as demons, and finding how the spirits are being called and which kinds and which ones was a point of interest throughout this book. Overall, I did really enjoy this book. It is a slow read, so if you get this, give yourself plenty of time to read it, but it was a very fascinating academic treatment on a narrow focus on one medieval manuscript, and I thought that the author made some really, really good points. I especially like that point at the beginning. I feel like it lends itself to discussion really well, and I would really love to have someone to have a discussion with this book with me, but I did the best I could, and I felt like this was an enjoyable read, and I'm very thankful for the suggestion to read this book, because I definitely think it exposed my mind to a lot of different ideas that I didn't have before reading this book. So thank you for the suggestion. I recommend getting this if you have any interest in maybe a little bit more of an academic take of magic in medieval societies. If you have any thoughts or comments, please leave that in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.